Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Liane Henschke, Executive Director of the Tennessee World Affairs Council, a nonpartisan and nonprofit organization that promotes global literacy, international awareness, understanding, and connections to prepare Tennesseans to thrive in an increasingly complex and connected world. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Matthew Hughes, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of America in Washington, D.C., hosted by Tennessee World Affairs Council Chairman Karl Dean. This is part of our webinar series, Global Dialogue. Thank you both for being here with us today. Before we start this webinar, I would like to announce that all events for this semester are posted on our website, tnwac.org. We will have two events coming up at the beginning of October. On the 2nd, President and CEO Douglas Crulin will be our keynote speaker. On October the 9th, we will host the President and CEO of TVA, Jeff Liesch. We welcome all of you. So let me introduce the moderator of today's webinar. Karl Dean is the chairman of TNWC Board of Directors. He served as the 6th mayor of Nashville and Davidson County. He was elected in 2007 and re-elected in 2011. Dean first held public office when he was elected as Nashville's public defender in 1990. He was re-elected in 94 and 98. He served as Metro Law Director from 1999 to January 2007, when he resigned to run for the office of mayor. Karl Dean has taught at Vanderbilt Law School, Belmont University, and Boston University. I now turn it over to the Chairman Dean, who will introduce the CEO Hughes and moderate the discussion. Please, for the attendees, please use the chat to ask questions. Please.
Thank you, Liane, and welcome, Matthew. I'm happy to have you here. Today's guest, Matthew Hughes, is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the World Affairs Council of America, and he's been in that position since January of 2003. Prior to that, he had served as the head or the executive director of the World Affairs Council International Relations in Kansas City, Missouri. His career has been spent both in education and working for nonprofits. And he has a master's degree from the University of Notre Dame and a master's degree from the Global International Studies from the University of Kansas. So Matthew, welcome. And let me just start out by asking you to just tell us what the World Affairs Council of America is and when it was founded.
You bet, Karl. Thanks so much, and thanks to Liane for this invitation for today. WACA, we call it, the World Affairs Councils of America, really has been around since 1986 as an official organization, but the councils go back much farther. And just as you have the fabulous council in Tennessee, we have 90 World Affairs Councils around the country in 43 states, helping their communities understand what's going on around the world as apolitical, nonpartisan educational organizations, which I don't have to tell you how important that is in this time of polarization. So for the last 18 months since the beginning of 23, I've had the privilege to be here in DC, supporting and strengthening our national network of councils. And we hear a few things from the councils as we go through this time right now. One is how important it is to bring people together in this time of division. And I think that for the councils that have been around for decades, our oldest council goes all the way back to 1918. We know that to be the case, that these are community spaces for people to come together. But two, we hear just how important it is for people to be aware of what's going on around the world. Even in a place like Nashville, in a place like Kansas City, where I spent a number of years, where we feel far away from the world because the US has only 2 land borders and we're far away from them. The world is here in a lot of different ways. And it's really important to keep people plugged in. So that's what the councils are up to day to day. And we know how hard you all work in Nashville to make that possible for your state there.
So there are 90 cities and/or state organizations that really comprise the World Affairs Councils, and some of them came before the national organization was created. So I think you mentioned that the first one was 1918.
That's right.
And what city was that?
So that's the Foreign Policy Association in New York. In the following decade, in the 1920s, we had councils that were founded in Cleveland and Cincinnati in 1923, and then the state of Connecticut in 1924. So Connecticut is celebrating its centennial this year, and we'll be marking that at our national conference.
So the creation of the one in New York and then the ones that followed there immediately, was that related to World War I and the debate about the League of Nations and sort of a heightened interest in U.S. involvement in the world? Where did it come from?
You got it, Karl. So it's in the wake of World War I, exactly right. As the U.S. is debating, as American citizens are actively debating what it means to be a part of the world. And what it means, the League of Nations, which ultimately the U.S. ended up not supporting, was an opportunity for countries around the world to come together in dialogue. And the question here in the U.S. was, what does it mean for communities to come together in dialogue? To be educated, of course, all of this predates, television and the internet and all of that, and the ways that people now plug in. So hearing from people like Eleanor Roosevelt, who was a prolific speaker in the middle of the 20th century, going around to World Affairs Councils, was not only a big deal, but it was a chance for these individuals, many of whom were connected to the US government, to hear from people on the ground in communities. And so one of the things we're working on now is encouraging councils to get back into that ability to provide feedback and thoughts from communities to the decision makers that are coming out to speak to their communities.
I mean, it's interesting to me that I think of the World Affairs Council's role as being one of education, public education. I think it's one that encourages people to appreciate the importance of knowing what's going on in the world and knowing other people in the world. And it seems that, you mentioned that it came out of World War I, and prior to World War I, the United States was basically isolationist. And then after World War I, there's a reaction where we go back to being isolationist in terms of our overall foreign policy. That changes, of course, as you get to the end of the 30s and you go into the beginning of World War II. But so was the World Affairs Councils that were created, and this is prior to the national organization in 1986, but were these councils sort of deliberately saying we can't be isolationists? We have to be something different?
Look, if you read the book by David Allen, there's a historian named David Allen who a couple years ago published a book called Every Citizen a Statesman. Yeah. He traces through these very interesting early councils and how they were planted. The council in Cleveland was planted by the League of Women Voters. It was planted by women who at that time may not have been included in mainstream conversation, but said, this is important, we need to pay attention to it. Right? So it's about civic engagement. And the photo on the front of that book, which is from the Civic Center, the convention center in Cleveland, was tens of thousands of people who had come together for a council convention, right? They'd come together to actually talk about these things in person. It's a totally different lifetime. But it's really inspirational as we look at today and the time of disconnection that we live in, right? How do we come together, and how do councils play an important role in that? So there's something about the civic life of communities. There's something about individual engagement in the world and openness to difference, which we hear a lot about in the councils, right? Being apolitical, nonpartisan, right? Not taking a side on issues, but actually pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone. All of this finds its roots back in those early days where you're exactly right. I mean, if we take a position on anything, it's that people should be involved in the world.
Right. I would echo the recommendation of the book. And let me ask you this. As the organization then created or came together, I guess, these different branches or the different independent World Affairs Councils around the nation came together in 1986 to create the council that you're now the CEO of. How did that happen and why?
So there had been efforts through the course of time for councils to connect to one another. All the councils are independently owned and operated, as you said. My council in Kansas City that I came from, founded in 1955. Eleanor Roosevelt was actually the first speaker there. They were focused on their communities or the remit of their councils. And in the 80s, an increasing number of them started to come together and say, you know, we really think we could learn from each other, and we would love to have an entity that can support and strengthen this national network of councils and represent the national network externally. And so that was really the genesis of the World Affairs Councils. At the time, we had the even less friendly acronym of the National Council of World Affairs Organizations, or NCWAO, which nobody fortunately uses anymore because it's difficult to pronounce. But that's still our mission today, is to support and strengthen this national network, which is a fascinating task because the councils of the 90, approximately one half, are all volunteer. We have councils that have 1 full-time staff up to 20 full-time staff. We have communities that they serve from tens of thousands up to full states in some cases, like your council, for example. So it's a really diverse network. And then it spans nationwide. We go from Anchorage to Miami and Hawaii to Maine. So when you think about what it means to bring these different local communities together, and then try to have national conversations, it's daunting in some ways, but it's really exciting when you can get everybody in the same room or on the same Zoom to think through these issues.
And how does the council take, on the national level, take positions on foreign policy issues or governmental policies? I mean, what is the role in DC?
We don't. We're fully agnostic because we want to be able to work. You know, the idea is that an educational organization that's apolitical, nonpartisan has the biggest table. It can invite the most people to sit at the table. As soon as you start staking out positions, you really exclude certain voices from the conversation. Councils are conversation brokers, right? And you know, some of the topics that we have to deal with in the world today, whether it's Israel, Gaza, Russia, Ukraine, what's going on with the global economy, what was happening during the pandemic. Some of these are very divisive issues that people have visceral reactions to. And so our hope is that by bringing together the most people, we can expose people to new opinions, to new perspectives, to other backgrounds, and to heal social fabric, which I think has been rubbed raw in recent years.
Right. And so I guess it all goes back to where we began, is that education, public education, is sort of the principal goal of all World Affairs Councils, including the National Council.
You got it. You got it.
Right. How do you navigate, say, an issue like Gaza, where there are strong opinions, very strong opinions on what the U.S. position should be, or what the other countries' position should be, or what the UN should be doing? How do you educate the public without sort of confronting the tensions and the disagreements? How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think sort of masterfully you have to do it, right? Because you can aggravate tensions, you can inflame situations without meaning to. And I think some of the challenges that councils have had over the years that they've learned from are exactly where that's happened. I think a few things are important here. One, the framing of the program or the discussion really matters, right? So anything from the title to the speaker that you have, the selection of venue even can make a difference. But I think something that's really important that a lot of folks don't necessarily think about right away. We talk about seeing things from both sides, and there's a side A and a side B. The reality in a lot of global situations, a lot of local situations for that matter, is it's not black and white, and it's not even shades of gray. The world is in full color, and so there are nuances here. There's a spectrum of reality. There are multiple things that are true at the same time. And often, as we have very firm opinions ourselves, very firm perspectives on things, we may leave out certain nuances, certain aspects of the conversation that maybe don't support our basic tenets or whatever it might be. And I think the most effective council programming on really tricky situations, situations that have existed for a long time or that can continue to become more complex, is that we're considering multiple perspectives. And so councils will either bring in an encyclopedic speaker who maybe has a very broad range of expertise on a given topic and can present things from multiple angles. Or in some cases, they'll put on a series, as I know you all have done in Tennessee, where you'll talk about things over the course of time and you'll be able to dive in much deeper. You'll be able to give breathing room to topics, so that people don't react as viscerally. I mean, just with what we're seeing in the Middle East right now, how many different fronts does the conflict have right now? And how many different examinations does that deserve? In recent days, we've seen an inflaming of tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. And what is Lebanon's perspective on this? What's Iran's perspective? What's going on in Syria and Iraq? What's happening with the refugee situation that we were looking at several years ago with Syrian refugees, and how is that involved here? I mean, I think there are a lot of different layers to what's going on. And I think too often, unfortunately, in the news media through sort of the 24-hour repetitive news cycle that we're in, we end up two-dimensionalizing or one-dimensionalizing situations that really deserve a lot more exploration. And I think if people can bring curiosity to the table rather than reactivity, I think it really helps to promote the work of the councils and what we're trying to do.
And in terms of what you see from DC, but also what you hear about around the country, is there this public demand for this information? Is there the public demand to have a nonpartisan presentation, or to have both sides or many faceted sides also present? Is that out there?
It is, and the phrase that we often use in the council network is informed civil discourse. So if you break it down, what does it mean to be informed, right? What is our literacy diet, right? What is our media diet, and where are we getting our information from? What does it mean to be civil, especially at a time where people can be so reactive? And what does it mean to practice discourse? One of the most interesting things that we hear about in DC is not just the councils and communities around the country really being hungry for these opportunities to engage on these topics and issues and news stories. But it's also the folks that are here in Washington, the people of the think tanks and the embassies and the universities and government agencies are very eager to get what we call beyond the Beltway, right? Beyond the DC Beltway, out to these councils to hear perspectives, really hearkening back to sort of the early purposes of the councils, that it's not just receiving, we're not empty vessels that are meant to be filled, right? You've got incredible perspectives that are represented in Nashville and in communities around the country with people with incredible experiences and perspectives from personal experience. But it's also about offering feedback and acting as a sounding board for people who are coming out from some of these institutions in DC, because DC is a bubble at the end of the day, right? And it's very, very easy to get locked into what here is called the Washington consensus. Everybody's sort of on the same page about what needs to happen, or there's a side A, side B debate. But as you get out and talk to people around the country, as our council network has the privilege to do, we find that it's not so simple at the end of the day.
In terms of your background, you've had a lot of experience in education. You've actually taught. What programs does the national organization encourage the organizations around the country and also do themselves in the area of education? And what should cities be doing and states doing on world affairs in terms of education for youth?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question at a time where we continue to see education budgets threatened by cuts, right? And so as a former teacher, I can say, what does it mean to take the arts out of the classroom? What does it mean to take, field trips out of, students' experience set? What does it mean to take global opportunities away? And fortunately, there's a great network and ecosystem of organizations working in global education to figure out exactly what you're talking about, Karl. How can we be better supporting global development, global opportunities, global literacy for students? The national network has a cornerstone educational program called Academic World Quest, which is a high school student academic competition. The students participate in local competitions and then come to Washington for the national competition. It's a great way to open students' minds to what's going on around the world and to other opportunities that they might not have previously been aware of. But there are really interesting initiatives happening in communities around the council network to do exactly what you're talking about. We have councils that put on college and career fairs for high school students to think about opportunities they had no idea existed. I remember we did one in Kansas City, and we had the Airplane Mechanic Institute that showed up. They wanted to participate. And I said, this is for global opportunities for students. And they said, do you know that our certification is good in 120 countries around the world, right? No idea. Right. So how many of those opportunities exist for students who are college bound, who are maybe trade bound, who are going to be part of the foreign service or join the military? I mean, there's just an amazing number of opportunities. And so I think, the local communities, the states are battling against brain drain. And what does it mean to have students leave and not come back? So I think the more we can do to cultivate global perspectives, global realities in local communities, the more welcoming we're going to be as communities, but also the more opportunities students are going to find as they look at what's next.
Yeah, good. One of the things we've been trying to do is have speakers who come to the city, to Nashville, to make a public presentation, generally to college age or older folks, to have them go to our schools, high schools for the most part, and speak to those students. And that seems to have been well received. You mentioned World Quest. Tell us about World Quest.
Yeah, so it's been going on for more than 20 years at this point, and this is a flagship competition program similar to a Scholar Bowl or Quiz Bowl. There are 10 different round themes a year that deal with everything from space exploration to minerals in Africa to gender equality and all sorts of different topics and themes. We put together a study guide for students to use. We have schools around the country that are actually using this to create a curriculum for their students, in fact. And then councils will put on a local competition that can take any number of different forms and formats. And then the students come to DC for a multi-day experience in Washington. Part of that is the national competition, but we also hook them up with embassies and think tanks and universities here so they can really explore a range of different opportunities once they graduate from high school. It's something that we're in the process of evolving and setting up other chances for councils to plug into global education. But we've heard from students around the country and from teachers just how meaningful this exposure is for those students.
Great. What do you have any formal programs that work with businesses, the corporate world, in terms of international trade or sort of addressing the business issues that are of international interest?
And we know the business issues are many. I will say that many councils have a very positive relationship with the World Trade Center in their local community, along with other government agencies that support international expansion of business. So most of the councils don't get too involved in sort of the business development side. However, what we know is that businesses operate in global realities. And so it's important for many businesses to understand, if a war is going to break out or is continuing in a certain region, what does that mean for the viability of supply chains? I mean, what we're seeing in the Red Sea right now, for example, where the Houthis in Yemen are attacking supply ships that are coming through the Red Sea. I mean, that is absolutely impacting supply chains in a way we haven't seen since the pandemic, for example. So I think a number of the businesses that get involved at the local council level do so because they find value in sort of the bigger picture thinking that it brings. It's not just focus on dollars and cents and on the movement of goods and services. It really is focused on sort of the bigger picture and how things connect.
Yeah. So this is your You're in your third year as CEO?
I think middle of the second year. Yeah, I've been here for
Middle
18
of second
months now.
year?
Yeah.
And what are your plans? What are your aspirations for the organization?
You know, I think we've got a lot of opportunities. We're sort of drowning in opportunities from a certain perspective because so much is happening around the world. And the board has recently affirmed that our mission really is to support, strengthen, and represent the council network. So that's what we're here to do. I think one of the opportunities, one of the biggest opportunities we have, and thinking of our friends in the business world, they will remind us that 95% of consumers are outside the US. 95% of voices, therefore, are outside of the US. What does it mean to involve more non-US voices in the council network? We have had incredible participation in councils from around the US government, from think tanks and universities that are based in the US. But what does it mean to get more perspectives from outside the US in the council network? So that's one of the things that we're working on, is creating connections with other countries and entities, think tanks and so on, that exist in those other countries and that are helping to sustain conversations there, much like what's happening in the US. We also know, to your earlier point, Karl, how important and how formative education is for communities around the country. That's how we build up our communities, is through a strong educational pipeline. And so we're looking at opportunities not just for students, but what does it mean to support teachers as they're pursuing global opportunities to bring those to their students? If we are able to impact the life of a single student, it's the life of a student, and that student goes on to do great things. If we can impact the life and perspective of teachers, that teacher is impacting class after class after class of students. And so it's one of the things that we're actively looking at. It's why for the last few years, we've had a global education person here at the national office helping us to really think through the sorts of opportunities and really the gaps that exist in global education currently that WACA can help to fill and support.
Okay. Does a person who's interested in WACA, the national organization, do people become members of WACA independently of being members of a city or state board, or just membership in the organization?
So we have different ways for people to plug in. We certainly encourage, first and foremost, for people to plug in at the local council level. That's where they're going to have their most valuable sort of engagement, I think, you know, with the speakers who are coming in, but also the communities that are built there through the council. So we would certainly encourage people to get in touch with their local council. And if you're lucky enough to live in the state of Tennessee, I really do hope that you'll get involved with the Tennessee World Affairs Council. We do have a few national level opportunities, however, which include committees and task forces that are working on different initiatives for the national network. That's a good opportunity for people to plug in. We also have the National Conference, which is an annual event that's held in Washington, where councils and others who are interested will come together to think critically about the state of the world. This year's theme is Seeing from the Other Side. It'll be held 2 weeks, after the presidential election. And we'll look at polarization at home, but also the repolarization of the global community. So registration remains open for that, and we invite people to consider signing up and joining us here in Washington, D.C. for a few days of really meaningful engagement. We also have other opportunities to support the national network that are on our website. People are certainly welcome to take a look there, which does include financial support for the councils and the work that they're doing. It's a really incredible network that has benefited over time from the generosity of some really remarkable individuals. And so certainly invite anyone who's interested in plugging into the national network to reach out to us here at the national office, and happy to talk with them about that.
Great. Is there anything else that you want to mention, any other program that you all do that you want to talk about that I haven't asked you about?
Well, you know, one of the interesting things that we do is a lot of programming to support the councils in the work that they're doing. So just later today, for example, we have a program we call WACA 101, which is an introduction to the council network for board and staff from councils. We also have a chance for councils to connect at different functional areas. So we get the marketing and communications people, or the global education people, or the public programming people together every so often to help them with the work that they're doing. So we're working on that, and we've got some other things in the pipeline as well.
Good. Well, thank you. Leanne, is there anything else?
No, not for the time being. It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, CEO Matthew Hughes, and the chairman, Karl Dean, for this important conversation, enabling our audience to understand more about WACA and the role of all 90 World Affairs Council, including ours, of course. The program will be archived and available on teenwac.org soon. Consider becoming a member and a donor supporting the Council to carry out its mission through all events and projects on global affairs. Thank you all, and goodbye for now.